The following transmission contains unencrypted instances of explicit language. Mature audiences are cleared to proceed.
Todd! Todd! You can take back control of the situation if you force the audience's hand. You can still negotiate.
No negotiation, Dave.
You can still take control of this and stop these stupid comedic bits.
You think you can have half a podcast, David? A podcast without dumbass comedy bits? I couldn't stop this podcast even if I wanted to.
Shall we begin? Let's begin.
Episode 2 of television miniseries The Company visits two specific events from the height of the Cold War. We're given both the micro and macro view of the Yugoslavian Revolt of 1956, as well as the invasion of Cuba in 1961, both of which can be regarded as failures of democracy against the Soviet threat. I'm Todd.
And I'm Dave, and we like to talk about spy movies.
How much was the CIA actually involved in these events? How much should the CIA have been involved? We're going to ask ourselves these questions and more in this episode of Spies Like Us. So we're back on The Company. We came back here with part 2. We always kind of plan to do like all 3 episodes of The Company. But we came back to this one specifically because we just did The Good Shepherd, which had a lot of Bay of Pigs kind of stuff. There's a lot of stuff centered around 1961. Yeah?
The Good Shepherd didn't really do much with the Bay of Pigs. It was just kind of brought up, and like we saw a little bit of the background, but the main story was surrounding, the moles and the underlying story with Edward and his son and just the life of espionage.
But the core enveloping story was about how his son
had leaked information about Bay of Pigs. Yes,
right. Yeah. So it was core to the story. And we'd spent, enough time there that I felt like, it made sense to, go ahead and flesh that out some more before we move on to some other spy movies. We have our main character, Chris O'Donnell.
Jack is kind of involved in these huge events in intelligence history and plays a very pivotal role.
He's a fictional character that's surrounded by historical figures, such as
James Jesus Angleton, played by Michael Keaton. Taridi, which I don't think that was his real name, but that was played by Alfred Molina.
Harvey Taridi is just a rename of William King Harvey. But other than that slight name change, it is the guy. He was famous. He was famously the biggest drinker in the CIA.
Was his code name really Sorcerer? Because that's the coolest code name ever.
Ooh, I'm not 100% sure on that, but I wish it was.
Yeah.
Who else do we have on stage here?
We have Frank Wisner.
Yes, real guy.
Real guy. And then we have Alan Dulles, the infamous director of the CIA.
Played by a guy that looks amazingly exactly like Alan Dulles. Did you see that picture?
Yeah.
With him and JFK?
Yes. Yeah.
I thought it was a fucking Photoshop job.
He looks just like him.
Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't a guy that lived Jack's life. He was mainly inserted into in this historical event, let's kind of play with this person and we'll just make him Jack. And then they did that throughout the whole series.
We have basically 2 chapters. The first half has to do with the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. And the second half deals with the Bay of Pigs invasion of 1961 with a few little sprinkles of Operation Mongoose in there. Jack performed, our fictional Chris O'Donnell character, he performed some somewhat vital functions in the first episode. In this part of The Company, he really is just there as, I mean, he's definitely our audience surrogate. He's kind of like the eyes and ears where the movie makers want to put a person into position that they can see the actual events on the ground as a context for us to uh, appreciate as the audience what the head honchos back in Washington are talking about.
Right.
Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. What I really liked about the company is we kind of see a lot of different perspectives in intelligence. We see the higher ups making decisions. We see on the ground foot soldier type of decisions, and we get to see the aftermath and the execution of all these plans. So I really enjoyed watching the miniseries.
I think this episode in particular is just kind of a broad view of the Cold War told in 2 chapters. Even though there's many other stories that could be told about the Cold War, I think if you understand these 2 events, one happening in Europe, one happening in Central
South America. Yeah, Central America.
Well,
Central
Central,
America.
right?
Yeah.
Because I actually, my geography is pretty shitty. I'm not even actually sure I could find Cuba on a map, but apparently it's pretty fucking close to Florida, right?
Yeah. There was always statements of, in our backyard type of thing.
I don't know. I would call that the table set. We'll start with Hungary and tear it apart in the briefing room. You ready?
Yep.
Voice pattern recognized. Retinal scan complete. Validating security clearance. Clearance granted. You may now enter the briefing room.
Let's go to the history lesson on here. October 23rd in 1956 is when the first major post-World War II resistance against the Soviet attempt to control all of Eastern Europe. The Hungarian people, they were getting tread upon by an agency called the AVH in this movie. It translates differently into Hungarian, but they're basically a secret police arm of the KGB in Hungary. And they've been just crushing all dissent and doing all the like stupid evil shit that we're always like mad about the Soviets for doing in the Cold War. Grabbing people up from their homes, sending them to concentration camps, and just jackbooting their way all over the country. What happened in October is the people had enough. They rose up. They reinstalled a popular, democratically minded politician who had just been like kicked out of office like a year previous. They put him back in charge, and within a week, he had disbanded the AVH. He had announced withdrawal from the Warsaw Pact, which was the, that's like the Warsaw Pact is kind of like the opposite of NATO, right?
Yeah.
And had announced free elections. And 5 days later, the Soviets said, nah, brah, and sent in a bunch of tanks. That is what happened in history.
In the movie, we get to see a scene where Frank Wisner is like purporting that we should back up the rebellion. They're winning, and this was a big point that I think you wanted to get to. And Dulles doesn't want to get involved because we're not supposed to get involved, and there's no policy for getting involved. But the leader of the revolutionary group is mostly college students, and it's led by, I believe, a professor. And Jack's mission is to tell the leader to postpone this rebellion. And the leader says, well, what have you guys been telling us in Radio Free Europe for all this time? You've been telling us to revolt, to revolt, to revolt. And, here we are. And Jack says, we weren't involved. We weren't involved in that. There's actually a dispute of whether or not CIA was involved in some of the broadcasts and Radio Free Europe. Tim Weisner wrote a book called Legacy of Ashes, where he makes these like claims about the CIA being a failure intelligence agency. Based on Weiner's book, the CIA had massive increased CIA-controlled Radio Free Europe broadcasts directed towards Hungary, supporting the revolution, among some other things. The CIA themselves dispute this review in the book, and I actually went and read their review of the book, and their claim is Weiner's major source for the assertion of CIA's culpability came from like a New York memo somewhere. Weiner claims Frank Wisner was ordering Radio Free Europe to incite violence against the communist regime. According to the CIA review of the book, Weiner's major source was from a New York memo, but that was his only basis for that statement. He also, Tim Weiner, the author of the book, also claimed that the Radio Free Europe was claiming the United States would back the revolution, but those statements didn't come out till after it was successful.
We don't actually know that there was ever any full-throated support for revolution via Radio Free Europe.
Right.
And so, I can't tell where the movie gets this, because Wisner is passionate in his appeal to intervene in this movie. I don't know where they get that from. It's certainly detailed in, like you said, Tim Weiner's Weiner. I see Weiner.
Yeah.
But that book comes out in 2006, January of 2006, and that's why I wanted to mention and put a pin in the timeline of where the miniseries comes out. It comes out in basically a year and a half later, and I'm not sure exactly what the production schedule is, but I'm not sure that they could fit that story, even if they, if the makers of this miniseries bought Weiner's Legacy of Ashes,
right,
hook, line, and sinker, if that's enough time for them to have folded that into the story. And let's also point out that
the book that it was based on came out in 2002.
Right.
Which was way before that.
And I didn't read the book. I don't have a copy of the book, so I don't know if the original book had this same take on it. I feel like it was fed in. My gut says that it's not just Legacy of Ashes that is the sole source for the notion that someone in the CIA, possibly Frank Wisner, was vocally advocating for revolution in Eastern Europe. That's just my take.
I mean, I'm just going based off of the wiki sources at this point for that. The two I guess two conflicting sides comes from Weiner's book and then the CIA's review of that book. And they're claiming Wisner had no direct involvement with the Radio Free Europe. What is historical is, though, there actually was one CIA officer in Hungary, which I think is who Jack is loosely inserted into. There really was just one guy there.
Yeah, but he wasn't inserted in a month before the uprising.
Right.
You see in the movie.
Right.
He'd been stationed there for 5 years.
Yeah, and then when stuff went down, he was reporting back so what should I do? And they were like, well, I guess keep your head down. And
Right.
yeah, and apparently that agent spent most of his time keeping his cover. So he would just go to like stores and buy stamps and envelopes or something, which I kind of like. Uh, but
The
that
point
that
I
that
wanted the point I wanted to make though is that the Radio Free Europe, Jack, uh, like our Hungarian freedom fighter says to him, like, hey, this is what we've been hearing from Radio Free Europe, and Jack says, like, hey, that's not us.
right,
But that's, I mean, whether or not the CIA was involved, it's definitely true. The CIA at that point would have denied any involvement
right,
in Radio Free Europe.
right.
So, I think it's still like a little bit open for like how much of it was propaganda and how much of it was, and also like,
Well, Radio Free Europe
what's
was definitely propaganda.
right, but what's
It
the
was
point of sure, but that's the argument I feel like we keep having about this is like, what is the point of propaganda if there's not a goal, an end goal? You don't just throw it out there to throw it out there. You should have a response that you're trying to incite from the listening audience that you're broadcasting to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's in dispute that Radio Free Europe was used for propaganda. I think they're saying just their use in Hungary.
How serious were anyone in the CIA on following up on any of the knockdown effects or fallout effects of Radio Free Europe? In this movie, it's made clear that Frank Wisner is passionate about that project.
Oh
He
yeah,
he builds his passion through several meetings. At first, he's just like kind of like, "Hey, we should look into this," and then later he's like, "Guys, we really got to do something about." And by the end of this segment, like he's just like losing his fucking goddamn mind over the fact that they're not willing to, push in and support what at the moment looks like it could be a very successful revolt against Soviet power in the Eastern Bloc. So what he does in the movie, so we can't just stick to history. At some point, we got to talk about like what actually happens in the movie and take it, at its face value. He says like, in one of the meetings, like we've spent 5 years trying to incite these people into just this kind of situation. And apparently he's the guy that is the one that sent Jack in there.
right. By himself.
Right.
Yeah,
Without a team, which I always know is always going to get minus 5 points from you.
yeah. And this is actually uh, my number three worst was sending Jack in alone. You always need a team. Like, and the fact that we actually had one guy in there kind of makes me concerned. But uh, yeah, it's just a bad idea to have someone out there by themselves. I guess presumably, he was just there to kind of get information and then falls into the revolution. I'm not sure.
Right. Well, I questioned it for a bit. I questioned it for a long time, and I finally came around to the idea that, if I buy into the idea that Wisner, okay, because Jack tells two stories in Hungary. To the revolutionaries, he says, you guys got to back off and wait, right?
Right.
When he gets captured, which we're going to talk about in a minute, he tells the Russians, oh, the Americans are totally going to come in right fucking now.
Yeah.
You guys should run scared. This actually, like, it actually kind of does make sense in a couple ways. Like, number one, because we see back in Washington that Frank Wisner is like pushing a boulder up the hill on trying to convince everyone that the Americans should become involved.
Right.
It makes sense that he sends Jack in to tell the Hungarians, you guys need to wait. What I'm inferring from this is like Wisner is still like, I need time. I need time to convince everyone else in Washington that this will be a good idea. And that's the reason I send Jack in to tell them they need to wait so that I can, talk everyone else into it in Washington. But it also makes sense, and I didn't, I had a huge question mark on it myself. When Jack immediately says, after he gets captured, like, oh, the Americans are coming right in. But that also makes sense, right? That would be the right play for him, like to have been prepped to like tell the Hungarians that we're not coming in necessarily. But if you get captured, or if you have any opportunity to sow disinformation to the Soviets, you should definitely tell them we're coming in right away.
Right. And this actually was my number 3 best, was Jack having a cover story in case, he was ever revealed to be CIA. And so when he sees what was her name, Elizabeth, being interrogated, he's like, okay, I'm CIA, and he lists his rank and blah blah blah, and they're like, well, why are you here? And he's like, I was here to tell them that the U.S. will come and back up your revolution, full front force or whatever. And I think it was a good play. The one thing that I think bothered the both of us, though, when he first met Elizabeth, she tells him flat out, by the way, the AVH are onto you. They know you're CIA. They're watching you. They've been following you. Just wanted to give you a heads up. And then how does he get caught? He's just standing brooding in the middle of a bridge somewhere out in the open by himself. I, I think that was probably the worst thing for him to do. He should have just bunkered up in his hotel, picked the right times and places to go from here to there, talk to whoever, and that made my number 2 worst.
Because he was told in exquisite detail by Elizabeth. Like, the first thing she says, like, when he makes his contact with her, like, plus 5 points to, like, a little bit of code phrase there, I think, was going on in the museum.
Right.
When, she's teaching, she's, doing a guided tour, and he asks a very specific question. I think that was supposed to be their little, like, nod and a wink, like, this is your contact. She explicitly, like, says, like, you were followed, and we're going to get you out the back. And he's like, what's going to happen if they don't see us go up the front? She says, they'll go back to the hotel. She says, I've seen it a million times before. She, like, basically, like, explains this whole fucking thing. Like, the AVH is onto you. And he's still, like, dude, the way he gets nabbed is just, it's disgustingly bad. It's
really bad. He's just standing over there, like, daydreaming, just thinking, like, those, in movies where someone's just standing there thinking about things that are going on and by themselves, that look in movies, that's exactly what it is. Just by himself out in the open,
full on hostile territory without a team.
Right. Without a team.
Right. And, he's walking across this huge bridge. I don't know, take a taxi, put on a fake mustache, do something.
I know, right? It was pretty bad.
I'm gonna be highly interested in hearing what your number 1 worst is, if that wasn't it. Throughout the whole sequence, like, of the Hungarians, they begin their revolt, they're succeeding, and then Wisner, like, really wants someone to do something about it, and then they don't, and eventually, like, this kind of sort of semi ties into actual fact. Like, they at the end of the sequence, we're going to see Wisner suffering a mental breakdown and retiring from the CIA, which actually, just historical note, didn't happen until like 7 years later.
Right.
But I'm sure
But
if you're writing this stuff for TV, you know, it's dramatic to put it in at this point.
it really fit his character as he was gradually going up and adamantly trying to convince Washington to back Hungary, and then everything falls apart and people die, and then he just has a complete nervous breakdown. So it worked well for a story.
And here is not only, I think, my best tradecraft, my number one best tradecraft of this movie, it might be in the running for my number one best tradecraft of any scene in any movie that we have done on this podcast so far. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
Talk about the one with Kritsky, right?
Yeah. So, spoiler, sorry, Kritsky is a mole.
Yeah, and Kritsky is Jack's friend they went to college together with.
Right.
He's a fictional character. His code name isn't, but just so for the audience, you guys know who Kritsky is.
He's also you know, Philby was a bad situation because, you know, he was MI6 and was a good personal friend of James Angleton, and so was privy to deep intelligence on what was going on that he didn't need to hear. But Kritsky, who at this point in the film, by the way, like, you know, the audience has, you know, if you're just watching it straight through, you have no idea yet that he is the mole. But here's his fucking genius play. The Hungarians are winning the revolt, and he's the one that puts the notion, floats it out in the air that, like, hey, okay, I understand we're not going to send tanks in, but what if the Russians think that we're going to send tanks in? And he floats it out just a little subtly, but Alan Dulles immediately, like, smokes on his pipe and says, oh, that's a great idea. And, you know, Angleton says, yeah, like, fuck yeah, like, you know, put that out on all the wires and make sure the Soviets are listening. And you know, if you're paying attention, he says, make sure the Soviets are listening, and looks directly at Kritsky and blows smoke out of his nose in just a brilliant little piece. But yeah, it's absolutely number one because you are feeding an idea to the enemy that is the idea that you will attempt to deceive my side, but we will not fall for the deception because I'm going to inform my side that it is in fact a deception, and therefore it will not work. And that's also because, you know, maybe there still was a chance, even though it looked like Dulles was gonna no vote on getting involved. There still might have been a chance. Someone in the room maybe could have convinced him. This diffuses that.
Right.
100% diffuses that. And that's got to be like 1 million spy points. At least.
Yeah, I know, right? That's a really clever card to play.
Jack's abduction was no accident. They knew about him because they knew about him, and they knew about him because they have a mole. And, you know, it's all of Angleton's suspicions that are worked out through the thread of this episode are very much supported. You get even more, too, when, of course, Kritsky is, like, his best friend, you know, hanging out. And, like, the whole time, Kritsky is like, you know, I really think Eisenhower fucked up and he should have sent in troops, you know, like, and he's playing it like so perfectly, you know, with the information that we, after finishing the series, know that Kritsky is a mole. Like, he's doing such a good job of playing Jack. and that's some more spy points for him.
Definitely. He definitely plays like a master mole. Uh, far more than I guess Philby would have done at the time. Even with James Angleton, because after and this happened in real life where when Kim Philby was ousted, and it like shook the whole thing, and that put James Angleton like on this witch hunt for moles, and he was highly criticized for it, and we actually got to see that in well, actually all three movies, how highly criticized he was. But James Angleton, the real one, did find other moles within the ranks, and in this movie, he ends up helping to find the mole we're chasing, which is Kritsky.
I had just a couple of well, I had a little bit of minus points, spy points for. Okay, so Tarini's threat against the KGB works, and the AVH pulls Jack out of the cell, and the guy tells him, "Hey, we know the truth. We know the Americans aren't coming. The English chick told us that." I just want to really quick just put some minus spy points on that, because there's no profit in telling Jack that they know that he's lying.
Right. And I don't know, and you could say, oh, this is just exposition for the movie, but I don't really think it fits any sort of purpose in the movie. There's plenty of other evidence of a mole, so they don't really need to tell him.
Right.
And they tell him they got it from the interrogation. So I think minus movie points and spy points. I'm not really sure what the point of that was.
Well, like you said, it's good exposition, but I just wanted to put that pin in. Like, when you know that your enemy is lying to you, you don't tell them that.
Right.
Unless right? In general, right? Bad
Right.
tradecraft.
Right. Very bad. They should have done to him.
You let them
Yeah.
you let them think that you are still fooling them.
Right. What they should have done is done what Jack did and been like, hey, we know that you guys are coming, so you go tell your
We're gonna
boys
back
back in
off.
America.
We're gonna back off.
Yeah, we're gonna back off.
My
Yeah.
superiors have told me that since you have told me, which I know you're lying,
Right.
but I'm not going to tell you that I know you're lying. I'm going to pretend that I believe you.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you that, like, yeah, you know what? So because of what you've told me, and I can tell you're an honorable man, and I'll look into your eyes soulfully, and I might even go for a kiss.
Right.
But my superiors have said, yeah, we won't interfere with Hungary. You got nothing to worry about.
Right.
Instead of saying, like, ah ha ha ha, we've caught you in deception. Like, there's no profit in it. Here's a worse one, though. And this crept in after careful consideration. This did creep into my worst tradecraft number 3, and that's where, again, we got this successful Hungarian revolt. They've invaded and taken over like all the AVH headquarters and stuff. And you've got this guy that's like, I have information. I can tell you there's a mole. I can tell you what's going on. And I totally understand in the scene. You know the guy I'm talking about, right?
Yep. I know exactly which guy. After the revolution had succeeded, I guess the head of the AVH was like begging for his life, and was like, "I know there's mole in CIA. I'll give you the guy's name."
Right. And he's, they put a fat guy in there that, he's just supposed to look like this worm, that like will do anything to fucking save his own skin. And that's great and everything, but I understand that in that scene, like, definitely tensions are high.
Right.
And everybody wants to shoot somebody. But Jack fucks up here when I think, he says, like, he hears that, he turns to Hungarian revolutionary rebel leader who possibly could have a way to, I don't know, calm people down. And he's like, you can't shoot this guy. He has information that would be valuable to the CIA. Not the right phrasing, Jack.
Right? Yeah. the CIA that abandoned our revolution.
That you're the guy that you showed up and told us, like, we're, told us to delay, and then didn't show up with support, and now you're like, oh, we need this little tidbit. No, it absolutely should have been phrased more as, like, this guy has information that can profit your cause. We need to know what the Soviets know. We need to help you. And it also, like, it feels like a quibble a little bit, but it also, like, if you think it through, if they had got that guy and they had got his information, and that guy would have talked, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then a whole stack of dominoes would have fallen much more in democracy's favor.
Yeah, absolutely.
The whole everything else. So yeah, so I squeaked it in as my worst number 3.
I think it was both on their parts. I think the leader should have figured it out himself. This guy's supposed to be an academic, and he's leading a successful revolution. He should have realized that, well, and especially since Jack came there to tell him, by the way, you're surrounded by Soviet tanks that could be here in 11 hours. Maybe you should keep this guy alive for information for your cause. The guy should have thought of that himself. So
right, I put a little, but he's hot-blooded at that point. Like, he's really got the fire in his veins, and he's surrounded by a whole bunch of people with rifles that are all, like, chanting his name and saying, like, let's go, kill the pigs, traitor, traitor, traitor.
Yeah.
And that's Hungary, right?
Yeah.
Unless you had anything else to say about it.
Oh, yeah. By the way, I fucking loved the berets on the revolutionaries. It was it was perfect. Like here, like, it's very like Viva la Revolution. Like, they all had the berets, like, all of them. Every single one of them had the beret on. I don't know if that's a thing, and I'm just some, like, ignorant oregano.
Where did they get them? Like, what is the function of the beret as a symbol of la resistance?
Yeah, I know, right?
It just seems to be everywhere. It's constant. I guess the very first thing, like, my first step as, like, absolute dictator, is I would send my secret police in and, like, shut down all the beret manufacturers.
Yeah.
And all the stores where you can buy berets. There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
How are you gonna have your revolution now, huh? Huh? What, are you gonna wear baseball caps? I don't think so.
Yep.
And that concludes our tradecraft analysis of the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, as presented in the second episode of the Company television miniseries. Next week, we're going to go to Central America and see how this series presents the Bay of Pigs fiasco in Cuba and the CIA involvement therein.
As always, the best way to make sure you don't miss out on that is to hit that subscribe button on iTunes, Google, or your favorite podcast app. Also, you can find updates on our Facebook page or website, spieslikeus.net. And please, if you can help us out, give us some feedback by rating and leaving comments. We're always trying to improve the show, and your thoughts would be a big help.